The shattered vase. The scent of beeswax and old stone clung to the air of the grand hall, a familiar perfume Elara had come to associate with the ceaseless cycle of her days. Each morning, before the court stirred, she began her meticulous work, her slight frame, a shadow against the towering tapestries depicting ancient victories, her limp, a constant reminder of a forgotten accident, lent a rhythmic sway to her movements as she polished the intricate carvings of the oak banisters. Dust motes danced in the nascent light, filtering through the high, arched windows, illuminating her careful hands as they worked, transforming dull surfaces into gleaming reflections. Today, however, a sense of unease prickled at the nape of her neck. The castle felt taut, like a bowstring drawn too tight. Whispers of a recent skirmish on the northern borders had rippled through the servants' quarters, painting grim pictures of ravaged lands and restless beasts. Elara tried to push the anxieties away, focusing instead on the task at hand, the display of priceless royal artifacts that lined the hall. Her gaze, usually downcast, drifted to a magnificent azure vase, intricately painted with silver wolves chasing a moon. It was said to be one of Alpha Lyra's most prized possessions, a relic from his mother's lineage. As she reached for a silken cloth to dust its delicate surface, a low rumble vibrated through the flagstones beneath her feet. It began subtly, a deep thrumming that she almost dismissed as the distant clatter of the kitchens. But then it intensified, growing into a guttural growl that resonated through the very stones of the castle. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and a vase on a nearby pedestal wobbled precariously. Elara instinctively reached out, her fingers brushing against the cool ceramic. Then, a sudden violent tremor shook the entire hall, the ancient stones groaned, and a shower of plaster dust rained down from the high ceilings. Elara cried out, her balance failing as her bad leg buckled. Her hand, meant to steady the azure vase, instead knocked it from its perch. Time seemed to slow. The vase tumbled, an arc of brilliant blue against the muted backdrop of the hall, before striking the marble floor with a sickening, explosive crack. Shards of sapphire and silver scattered across the polished surface, reflecting the dim light like fallen stars. While the silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Elara's ragged breath and the frantic pounding of her own heart. Footsteps, heavy and swift, thudded down the hall. Two burly guards, their faces grim, appeared as if from the stone itself. Their eyes, hard and accusatory, immediately fell upon the glittering wreckage and then to Elara, frozen amidst the destruction. "She broke it," one of them grunted, his voice devoid of pity. The king's vase. Before Elara could utter a single word, they seized her, their hands like iron bands around her arms. She offered no resistance, her mind numb with shock and a creeping terror. This was not a mere accident. This was a transgression of the highest order. The Alpha King's wrath was legendary, a force of nature that few dared to provoke. She was dragged through the winding corridors, toward the rhythmic thump of her limp echoing her impending doom. The guards shoved her roughly into the Alpha King's audience chamber. The room was vast and imposing, with heavy velvet drapes and a massive throne carved from dark, gnarled wood. Alpha King Lyra sat upon it, a formidable figure even in repose. His dark hair fell over a stern brow, and his eyes, usually a piercing gold, were clouded with a dangerous, simmering rage. The air around him felt thick, charged with an unspoken threat. He wore a simple tunic, yet his presence commanded the room, every muscle in his powerful frame radiating a barely contained tension. He was a man burdened, his face etched with a weariness that even his anger could not entirely mask. He did not speak immediately, his gaze sweeping over Elara. a silent judgment that felt colder than any winter wind. She could feel the pressure of his scrutiny, a palpable weight that threatened to crush her. The guards pushed her forward until she stood directly before him, her head bowed in involuntary submission. "Explain this." Lyra's voice was a low growl, devoid of any warmth. It was a sound that made the very air vibrate, a clear warning. He gestured towards a servant who held a tray bearing the largest surviving fragments of the azure vase, a testament to her careless destruction. Ilara's throat felt dry, her tongue thick. "My king," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "There was a tremor. The castle shook. I tried to catch it, but—" She trailed off, her explanation sounding feeble even to her own ears. How could she describe the raw power of that tremor? The sense of an ancient beast stirring beneath their feet, without sounding utterly mad? Lyra's eyes narrowed, his golden gaze fixed on her. He saw a small, trembling woman, her face pale, her simple servant's tunic rumpled. He saw fear, but also something else, a deep, unsettling sadness in her eyes. It irked him, that quiet, internal sorrow, when he felt nothing but a blazing fury. The vase was not merely an object, it was a symbol, a tether to a past he desperately clung to. Its destruction felt like a personal affront, another chipping away at the fragile control he fought so hard to maintain over his own turbulent nature. "A tremor," Lyra repeated, his voice laced with venom, or perhaps sheer incompetence. He rose from his throne, a towering presence that dwarfed Ilara. "This vase," he said, his voice hardening with each word, "was a relic of my mother's lineage, a piece of our history. You have defiled it, and for that, there is only one consequence." His words hung heavy in the air, cold and definitive. Ilara knew what he meant. She had heard the whispers, seen the grim procession of others accused of lesser offences. The Shadowfang's pit. A place of impenetrable darkness where the Alpha King's uncontrollable beast resided, a creature of primal fury and boundless hunger. "Take her," Lyra commanded, his voice ringing with chilling authority. "To the pit. Let the Shadowfang decide her fate." The King's decree. The Shadowfang's pit. Lyra's voice reverberated through the throne room, each syllable a hammer blow against the hushed silence. His eyes, the colour of twilight, were fixed on Ilara, burning with a cold fury that left no room for doubt or appeal. Let the beast decide her fate. Such a deliberate act of disrespect to my mother's legacy, to my rule, cannot go unpunished. A collective gasp swept through the assembled courtiers, a wave of fear and disbelief. Whispers erupted like disturbed hornets, buzzing with an undercurrent of terror. The Shadowfang was more than just the Alpha King's beast. It was a primal force, a creature of legend tethered to the royal line, renowned for its untamed savagery. Few who entered its domain ever returned. Dame Isolde, her usually placid features etched with alarm, stepped forward, her silk robes rustling. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice a low, urgent murmur. "The Shadowfang, it has not been called upon for a judgment in generations. Its temperament is unpredictable. Perhaps a different form of penance." Lyra's gaze flickered to the old dame, sharp and unforgiving. Unpredictable," he scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips. "Its temper mirrors my own, Isolde. It knows betrayal when it senses it. This is not a matter for debate. My word is law." His hand clenched on the armrest of his obsidian throne, the dark wood groaning under the pressure. The air in the chamber grew thick with his suppressed rage, a palpable weight that pressed down on every soul present. Ilara, despite the tremor that ran through her slight frame, did not flinch. Her haunted eyes, pools of a muted grey, met Lyra's without accusation, only a quiet, almost unsettling resignation. She had known, the moment the vase shards scattered, that her life was forfeit. The Shadowfang's pit was merely the final, brutal confirmation of her insignificance in the face of royal wrath. There was no argument left in her, no plea for mercy. Her gaze drifted briefly to the broken remnants of the azure vase, still glinting dangerously on the polished floor, a symbol of her undoing. Two hulking guards, their faces grim beneath their horned helmets, stepped forward, their heavy plate armor clanking ominously. They flanked Alara, their towering forms dwarfing her. She offered no resistance as they took her arms, their grip firm but not overtly cruel. Her limp seemed more pronounced now, her every step a conscious effort. As they began to lead her away, the whispers in the court intensified, becoming a rising murmur of dread. Courtiers exchanged nervous glances, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. Some averted their gaze, unable to watch, while others stared openly, their faces pale. The decree was a stark reminder of the Lyra's absolute power. A chilling testament to the volatile nature of his rule, the border skirmishes, the dissent among the lesser lords. All of it seemed to fuel the king's fury, making him a more fearsome, less predictable ruler than ever before. Alara did not look back. Her path was forward, into the unknown darkness of the pit, into the maw of the beast. Her chin remained lifted, not in defiance, but in a weary acceptance of her fate. The rhythmic thump-drag of her limping foot echoed in the sudden, terrible silence that had once again fallen over the court, a mournful drumbeat accompanying her towards oblivion. The heavy oak doors, carved with ancient protective runes, swung open with a slow, deliberate creak, revealing a shadowed corridor beyond. The scent of damp earth and something wild, something profoundly animalistic, wafted into the throne room, then a faint, chilling promise of what awaited her. The beast's gaze. The heavy iron door clanged shut behind Alara, echoing like a death knell in the vast subterranean chamber. A wave of damp, earthy air, thick with the scent of raw meat and something untamed, washed over her. Her limp, a constant reminder of a forgotten skirmish, became more pronounced on the uneven stone floor. She was alone, utterly alone, in the suffocating darkness. Only a faint, phosphorescent moss clinging to the distant walls offered a ghostly luminescence, barely illuminating the cavern's immense scale. The pit was larger than she had imagined, a true arena for a beast of legend. The whispers in the court had painted it as a mere cage, but this was a world unto itself, carved from the very heart of the earth. Overhead, the distant grating of a portcullis being winched up sent a tremor through the floor, a sound that promised the unveiling of her executioner. Alara closed her eyes, her breath catching in her throat, preparing for the moment she would meet the creature that had haunted the nightmares of Lyra's kingdom for generations. Then, a low rumble started, deep within the chamber, vibrating through her bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force, pressing against her chest, making the air thrum. The growl intensified, raw and guttural, each vibration laden with a primal hunger that chilled her to the marrow. The faint light glimmered off something massive, moving in the gloom, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness. The Shadowfang emerged from an alcove carved into the rock, saw its immense form slowly coalescing into terrifying detail. It was a creature of myth made flesh, its fur, a swirling vortex of deep charcoal and midnight black, seemed to absorb the meager light, making it a living void. Spines, sharp as obsidian daggers, traced a fearsome ridge along its back, disappearing into the darkness of its tail. It moved with a predatory grace, each paw, larger than Alara's head, falling with an impact that shook the ground. The growl deepened, a continuous, menacing vibration that spoke of immense power barely contained. But it was its eyes that held her, twin orbs of molten gold, burning with an ancient fire, fixed on her. They were not merely animalistic. They held an intelligence, a fury that spoke of wildness unbound, yet also a flicker of something deeper, something burdened. The air grew heavy, charged with the beast's presence, making it difficult to draw a full breath. Ilara could feel the heat radiating from its massive body, the rank, musky scent of its power filling her nostrils. The Shadowfang took another ponderous step forward, its head lowering slightly, the growl rumbling up its throat. It was assessing her, a hunter sizing up its prey. Every fibre of Ilara's being screamed at her to flee, to cower, to beg. But she had faced worse than death in her life. She had faced the slow, agonizing erosion of her spirit, the casual cruelty of a king who saw her as less than dust. This, at least, would be swift. She straightened her shoulders, pushing past the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. Her worn tunic felt thin against the oppressive presence of the beast. Her limp throbbed, a dull ache that grounded her in the moment. She met the Shadowfang's gaze, not with defiance but with a quiet acceptance of her fate. There was no point in fear now, only in meeting her end with what little dignity she had left. She braced herself, waiting for the inevitable charge, the crushing blow. The golden eyes held hers, unwavering, as the beast's growl filled the entirety of the pit. The impossible kneel and the Shadowfang closed the distance between them, each footfall a tremor through the packed earth. Ilara watched it come, the air thick with the beast's musky scent and the metallic tang of its breath. It stopped mere feet from her, its colossal head dipping, not in aggression, but in a curious, almost investigative gesture. A low rumble vibrated in its chest, a sound that seemed to resonate deep within Ilara's own bones, stripping away the last vestiges of her fear. Its golden eyes, no longer fixed in a predatory stare, moved over her face, her tattered dress, the slight tremor in her hands. One massive nostril flared, then another, drawing in her scent, perhaps the lingering aroma of the palace kitchens, or the faint, almost forgotten scent of the herb she sometimes brewed for her aches. Then, to the disbelief of every living soul observing from the galleries above, the impossible happened. Slowly, deliberately, the Shadowfang began to lower its immense form, its forelegs bent at the knee, the muscles coiling and uncoiling with a fluid grace that defied its size. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, tore through the court. Alpha King Lyra, his face a mask of furious certainty moments before, felt a cold dread seep into his chest. His beast, to usually a roaring inferno of power and aggression, recoiled within him, a whimper escaping its usually silent depths. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a profound, disorienting confusion, a feeling akin to a fundamental law of nature being broken. The Shadowfang continued its descent, its head now level with Ilara's waist. It finally settled, a mountain of black fur and muscle, in a posture of complete submission. Its golden eyes, softer now, met hers, holding a depth of ancient understanding that stole Ilara's breath. A tendril of something akin to warmth, foreign and unsettling, bloomed in her chest. Chaos erupted in the observation decks. Shouts, gasps, and the frantic rustling of silk filled the air. Dame Isolde, who had been on the verge of collapsing in despair, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. It kneels," she whispered, the words barely audible above the din. Lyra felt his own beast thrash, not in anger but in a primal, disoriented panic. It was as if his very essence, the untamed power that defined his lineage, was being challenged, redefined. A cold sweat slicked his palms. He had never seen the Shadowfang kneel to anyone, not even to his father, the previous Alpha. This beast was an extension of his own untamed power, a symbol of his absolute dominion. For it to submit to a crippled servant, a woman he had cast aside without a second thought, was an affront to his very being. The beast within him roared, a silent sound that echoed in his skull, demanding an explanation, a correction to this impossible reality. The bond, usually a clear channel of instinct and command, he was suddenly fractured, buzzing with a dissonance that made his teeth ache. He pressed a hand to his temple, trying to quell the growing tempest inside him. Elara, the broken, the insignificant, had somehow touched the untouchable, swayed the unswayable, and in doing so, she had unwittingly, irrevocably touched him. Into the pit. A guttural whimper tore from Lyra's throat, though no sound escaped his lips. His inner beast, a raging inferno moments ago, now recoiled, a shiver running through its phantom fur. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was a profound, disorienting recognition, a shift in the very fabric of his being that sent a cold dread spiraling through his gut. The Shadowfang, his Shadowfang, had knelt. For a servant. For her. His gaze, wild and unfocused, darted between the massive, an obsidian beast, and the slight figure of Elara. She was still there, impossibly, serenely, her hand resting on the creature's muzzle. The beast's eyes, usually molten gold and brimming with untamed fury, were now half-lidded, a picture of tranquil contentment. The air, which had thrummed with a primal, bloodthirsty energy, was now strangely still, almost reverent. The call, a deep, resonating hum, vibrated not in his ears, but in the marrow of his bones. It was the Shadowfang's call, no longer a challenge or a threat, but an invitation, an imperative. Lyra found his feet moving before his mind could process the command. He descended the rough-hewn steps into the pit, each stone cold and unforgiving beneath his boots, a stark contrast to the foreign warmth that now radiated from the chasm. The scent of ozone and fear still clung to the air. But beneath it, a new fragrance emerged, something earthy, wild, and strangely comforting, like damp soil after a summer rain. The court above was a frozen tableau, their gasps and murmurs fading into a distant hum. Their collective confusion and fear were palpable, a tangible weight that pressed down on him. Yet Lyra felt strangely detached. His world had narrowed to the pit, to the beast, and to the woman who had defied every law of nature and dominion he had ever known. As he reached the sandy floor, the Shadowfang lifted its massive head, its gaze meeting his. There was no challenge, no aggression, only a profound, almost sorrowful understanding. It was a look that pierced through Lyra's carefully constructed facade, exposing the raw, aching core of his own buried vulnerability. He felt a phantom ache in his chest, and a deep thrumming that echoed the beast's silent lament. Elara, seemingly oblivious to his presence, continued to stroke the Shadowfang's snout. Her fingers, delicate and slender, traced the hard planes of its muzzle, each touch a feather-light caress. The beast responded with a low rumble, a sound that vibrated through the ground, settling deep within Lyra's own chest. It was a purr, he realized with a jolt, a sound he had never, in all his years, heard from the creature he called his own. He stood a few paces away, a silent observer in this impossible tableau. Elara's face, once pale with terror, was now softened, a faint flush high on her cheekbones. Her eyes, wide and luminous, reflected the golden glow of the Shadowfang's gaze. There was an intimacy to their interaction, a quiet communion that excluded him, the Alpha King, or the supposed master of the beast. He watched as Alara leaned closer, her voice a soft murmur that he couldn't quite decipher. The Shadow Fang dipped its head, nudging her hand with surprising gentleness. It was an act of profound trust, a surrender Lyra had never witnessed, never even imagined. He felt a strange pang, a mix of bewilderment and something akin to awe. His own connection to the beast, once a fierce, unyielding bond of power and control, now felt distant, fractured. The air around Alara and the Shadow Fang seemed to shimmer, a tangible field of quiet energy. It was as if they were wrapped in a private world, a sanctuary where the rules of the castle, of the kingdom, of Lyra's own dominion simply did not apply. A cold knot formed in Lyra's stomach. This wasn't just a beast submitting to a servant. And this was the very foundation of his power, his lineage crumbling before his eyes. And in its place, something new, something utterly unforeseen was beginning to bloom. A dangerous gift. A roar ripped through the air, not from the Shadow Fang, but from the assembled court. Accusations of sorcery, witchcraft, and dark arts rained down, each word a stone hurled at Alara. The Grand Chamber, moments ago hushed in horrified awe, now pulsed with a furious energy. Lyra, still grappling with the seismic shift within his own being, felt the vibrations of their fear and outrage deep in his bones. Their cries were a direct challenge to his judgment, a clamour for a swift, brutal end to this anomaly. "Execute her!" A voice shrilled, piercing the din. "She is a blight upon the crown!" "Sorceress, burn her!" Another echoed, gathering strength. Alara, kneeling beside the quiescent beast, remained unperturbed. Her gaze, tranquil and distant, was fixed on the Shadow Fang's closed eyes, her fingers still tracing patterns on its massive head. The beast's soft rumbling was a counterpoint to the court's fury, a private symphony that excluded every other soul in the room. Lyra watched her, a knot of dread tightening in his gut. His beast, his fierce, untamed Shadow Fang, lay subdued by a mere servant, and Alara, in her serene connection, seemed utterly oblivious to the storm raging around them. He felt a profound sense of exclusion, a chilling realization that the intimacy between them was a barrier he could not breach. His own bond with the beast, once an unbreakable tether, now felt frayed, stretched taut to the point of snapping. The Shadow Fang's familiar presence, and once a comforting weight in the back of his mind, now felt alien, distant, its essence resonating with something entirely new, something Alara had ignited. A cold panic began to bloom in his chest, an awareness that his dominion, once absolute, was crumbling before his very eyes. From the high galleries, Dame Isolde clutched the stone railing, her knuckles white. Her initial terror at the Shadow Fang's rampage had given way to an even more profound disquiet. The beast's submission was an act of impossible grace, yet the court's outrage was understandable. What ancient power resided in this unassuming girl, that a creature of pure instinct would bend to her will? A shiver ran down her spine, a mingling of awe and a primal fear of the unknown. She saw the raw, exposed vulnerability in Lyra's face, a sight few had ever witnessed, and it spoke volumes of the shift that had just occurred. Lyra's jaw tightened. The court's demands were a reflex, an urge to excise the unfamiliar, to restore the order Alara had so effortlessly shattered. But to kill her now, to extinguish that inexplicable spark, it felt like severing a crucial, yet undefined part of himself. The Shadow Fang's earlier recoil from him, the subtle shift in its very essence, played on a loop in his mind. He needed answers. He needed to understand. He raised a hand, a single commanding gesture that cut through the cacophony. The court, though reluctant, fell silent, their collective gaze fixed on their alpha. His voice when he spoke was low, but carried an undeniable weight. "Silence. She will not be executed." A murmur rippled through the hall, a mixture of shock and indignant protest. "But, Your Majesty," a lord began, stepping forward. Lyra's eyes, usually sharp and penetrating, were clouded with a turbulent mix of confusion and a nascent, dangerous curiosity. "She will be confined to a secure chamber under direct guard, my guard." The decision hung in the air, audacious and baffling to the assembly. To them, Ilara was a clear and present danger, a witch who had corrupted the sacred beast. To Lyra, she was a terrifying enigma, a living question mark that had shattered his understanding of power, of his own beast, and of himself. He felt the fractured bond with the Shadowfang acutely, a phantom ache in his spirit. He needed to understand what Ilara had done, what she was. His command was not a reprieve born of mercy, but of a desperate need to grasp the threads of a world that had suddenly unraveled. Two castle guards, their faces pale with apprehension, approached Ilara. As they reached for her, the Shadowfang's eyes flickered open, a low growl rumbling in its throat. The guards froze, but Ilara simply placed a gentle hand on the beast's snout. Its rumbling subsided, its gaze lingering on her for a moment, before its eyes drifted shut once more. She rose then, her movements unhurried, as if leaving a slumbering child. She offered no resistance as the guards took her arms, her composure unnervingly serene. As they led her away, Lyra watched her go, a profound sense of dread settling over him. He had chosen not to condemn her, but he knew, with chilling certainty, that he had just invited a far greater danger into his fractured world. This gift, this strange, potent connection Ilara possessed, that felt less like a blessing and more like a volatile force waiting to explode. The Shadowfang remained where it lay, a dark, motionless sentinel. Its presence, once a source of strength for Lyra, now felt like a stark monument to his unraveling authority. He could feel its distant contentment, a quiet hum that excluded him entirely, and in that exclusion he felt a profound and terrifying loneliness. The beast that had been an extension of his will, a symbol of his power, was now a mirror reflecting his own vulnerability, a creature irrevocably changed by the touch of a humble servant. Whispers in the dark, the oppressive silence of the castle's deepest chambers, pressed in on Lyra, a silence far heavier than any courtly clamour. Night after night, he found himself drawn down, past forgotten storerooms and disused servants' quarters, out to the heavily guarded room where Ilara was confined. He didn't announce himself, didn't even demand entry. Instead, he would pause at the reinforced door, a silent sentinel, listening. One evening, he used a discreet peephole, a relic from an ancient surveillance system, to peer within. Ilara sat on a simple cot, her back to him, but it was the other occupant of the room that truly arrested his breath. Shadowfang lay curled on the stone floor, a mass of obsidian fur, its head resting near Ilara's outstretched hand. The beast's usual restless energy, the low rumble that had once been a constant, familiar presence in Lyra's mind, was utterly absent. In its place was a profound quiet, an almost domestic stillness. Ilara's fingers, slender and graceful, moved through the thick fur along Shadowfang's neck, a gentle, in rhythmic motion that seemed to lull the terrifying creature into a state of utter peace. Lyra felt a jolt, not of anger, but of a desolate emptiness. The beast that had been an extension of his own primal self, a mirror to his untamed power, now offered this quiet solace to another. The connection he'd felt, a bond forged in blood and dominion, had frayed into nothingness, leaving him adrift. He watched Alara lean closer, her voice a soft murmur, too low for him to discern the words. Shadowfang stirred, a rumbling sigh escaping its massive chest, not of menace but of contentment. It shifted, nudging its head deeper into Alara's hand, like a giant, affectionate hound. Lyra returned several nights later, the compulsion a gnawing ache he couldn't ignore. This time, he found Alara speaking, her voice a low, melodic hum that resonated with a quiet sorrow. Shadowfang was curled at her feet, its gaze fixed on her face, seemingly understanding every nuanced inflection. "They always said I was clumsy," Alara whispered, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the beast's fur. "Always breaking things, always in the way. It was never on purpose, of course. Just too many things, too little space. And then the punishments. Always the punishments." Her voice held no bitterness, only a profound weariness. "It's funny, isn't it? How easy it is for people to see what's broken, but never what broke it." Shadowfang let out a soft whine, nudging her hand. Alara smiled, a flicker of genuine warmth that surprised Lyra. He had only ever seen her serene, unreadable. This smile was different, touched with a vulnerability that pierced through his kingly detachment. "You understand, don't you, old friend?" she continued, her gaze meeting the beast's luminous eyes. "The wildness inside, the feeling of being misunderstood, of having a power you don't quite control, that others fear. They tried to beat it out of me, that clumsiness, that unruliness, just like they tried to chain you." She paused, her eyes glazing over slightly, as if seeing something far away. "They thought it was defiance. I think it was just too much spirit for too small a cage." Lyra felt a strange pang in his chest. Too much spirit for too small a cage. The words resonated with a disturbing familiarity. He had always seen Shadowfang's wildness as a reflection of his own strength, his untamed nature. But what if it was something else? What if it was pain, more like Alara's? The thought was unsettling, a seismic shift in his understanding of his most powerful ally. The beast had never been broken by his hand, only controlled. But Alara spoke of a different kind of pain, one that simmered beneath the surface, a shared wound that somehow bound her to the creature he had believed was solely his. The profound loneliness he'd felt since Shadowfang's alienation deepened, but now it was tinged with something else, a burgeoning curiosity, a reluctant recognition of a truth he had stubbornly ignored. He had seen the beast's fury, its loyalty, its raw power. He had never considered its quiet suffering, its vulnerability. And in Alara's hushed confessions, he was beginning to see the reflection of both, more the mirror of rage. The familiar tremor that once signified Shadowfang's readiness for the hunt now felt like a severed nerve, a phantom ache in Lyra's own chest. The beast, usually a whirlwind of shadowed fury, lay curled beside Alara, its eyes, once molten gold, now soft and half-closed, reflecting the muted light of the chamber. A low, rumbling purr vibrated through the stone floor, a sound Lyra had never heard from his beast, a sound of profound contentment that twisted a cold knot in his gut. He remembered the first time he'd faced Shadowfang, a young alpha, raw with grief after the ambush that had claimed his family. The beast had been a whirlwind of muscle and claw, even then, untamed, magnificent, a primal force Lyra had believed he could bend to his will, or just as he would bend the kingdoms that dared to challenge his nascent rule. He had envisioned himself astride its back, a symbol of his unbreakable power, a king who commanded the very wild itself. Yet, despite years of shared hunts and battles, a deep chasm had always separated them. Shadowfang had obeyed. Yes, but often with a barely suppressed snarl, a twitch of its powerful tail that spoke of a spirit that could not be truly broken, only momentarily coerced. Lyra had attributed it to the beast's inherent wildness, a trait he respected, even admired. He had seen its ferocity as an extension of his own untamed rage, a powerful weapon against a world that had stolen everything from him. He had never considered that the beast's recalcitrance, its occasional defiance, might be a mirror reflecting the very grief and fury he'd encased within himself, a protective shell that had grown too thick, too brittle. Now, watching Shadowfang nuzzle Ilara's hand, a sudden, chilling clarity pierced through the haze of his confusion. The beast's untamed nature wasn't a separate entity, it was an echo of the unbridled sorrow he had refused to acknowledge, the burning anger he had never allowed himself to fully feel, only to wield. He had mourned his family with a king's stoicism, burying the screams beneath layers of duty and vengeance. Shadowfang, then, was the unrestrained howl, the raw, tearing grief Lyra had denied himself. A sharp jolt of dread shot through him. The beast hadn't been an extension of his power. It had been a living manifestation of his buried turmoil. And now, Ilara, with her quiet understanding, her calm empathy, was taming not just the beast, but the very rage Lyra had cultivated for years. The beast's submission to her wasn't a betrayal of Lyra, it was a revelation of his own inner chaos, finally finding solace in another. The air in the chamber felt thick, pressing down on him. He felt exposed, stripped bare, as if Ilara, through her connection with Shadowfang, could see the gaping wounds he had so carefully hidden. Her presence, once an irritation, then a source of baffling intrigue, was now becoming something far more profound, far more terrifying. She held a key, not merely to the beast's obedience, but to the intricate, locked chambers of his own heart. A key he hadn't even realized existed. A wave of panic, cold and sharp, washed over him. He had built his kingdom on strength, on control, on the iron will of an alpha king. But if his beast, the very symbol of his dominion, was merely a reflection of his untamed self, and if Ilara could soothe that primal wildness, what did that make him? A ruler whose power was an illusion, his ferocity a shield for a broken man. The thought was a venomous whisper in his mind, threatening to unravel the very fabric of his being. He watched Ilara stroke Shadowfang's magnificent head, a quiet, almost sacred gesture. And in that moment, Lyra understood. The true danger wasn't Ilara, it was the truth she held, shimmering in the beast's placid eyes. Chael's challenge. A sudden jarring clamour erupted from the castle gates, shattering the fragile quiet that had settled over Lyra's strained court. The heavy oak doors, usually opened with respectful decorum, were flung inward with a theatrical flourish, echoing like thunder through the great hall. A figure emerged, framed against the grey afternoon light, his silhouette radiating an audacious self-assurance that instantly set every nerve in Lyra's body on edge. Lord Kyle, Alpha King of the Northern Reaches, strode into the hall as if he owned the very stones beneath his polished boots. His cloak, the colour of twilight, swirled around him, embroidered with the snarling wolf's head sigil of his house. A predatory smile played on his lips, revealing perfectly white teeth that seemed too sharp, too deliberate. His eyes, the startling hue of glacier ice, swept over the assembly, lingering for a fraction too long on Lyra, then flickering dismissively towards the shadowed corner where Ilara was confined. "My apologies for the unannounced visit. In King Lyra." Chael's voice, a rich baritone, resonated through the hall, laced with an insincere politeness that grated on Lyra's ears. News travels swiftly, even to the frigid north, and I confess, the tales reaching my ears were so outlandish, I felt compelled to witness this spectacle for myself. He gestured broadly, his hand encompassing the very air around Lyra, implying a weakness, a decay. Lyra felt a cold dread claw its way up his spine. Shadowfang, usually a solid, reassuring presence in the periphery of his consciousness, now felt distant, a confused tremor. The beast, usually a bastion of his fury, now recoiled, its instincts muddled, its fury muted by Alara's influence. This vulnerability, this strange disarray within his own being, was a stark wound exposed to Kael's scrutinizing gaze. "Lord Kael," Lyra managed, his voice a low growl, struggling to project an authority he suddenly felt slipping through his grasp. "Your presence is unexpected. What tales have so disturbed your mountain solitude?" Kael chuckled, a low, unnerving sound. "Oh, merely whispers of a common servant, a mere slip of a girl, bending the will of the great Shadowfang. Of your beast, Lyra. A beast that, if the legends serve me, has never bowed to any but its true alpha." He paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air, a poisonous fog. "And now, not even to you." A ripple of unease spread through the assembled lords and ladies. Dame Isolde, perched in the gallery, felt a shiver of primal fear mingle with her awe. Kael's words were not merely an insult. They were an open challenge, a public dissection of Lyra's authority, exposing his unacknowledged pain. "Are we to believe, Lyra," Kael continued, his voice rising, gaining momentum like an avalanche, "that this creature has stumbled upon some hidden truth, some secret of your beast's heart that you, its bondmate, have missed for years? Or is there something far more sinister at play?" His glacial eyes fixed on Alara, who stood with an unnerving calm, her gaze steady, unflinching. "This girl," Kael declared, his voice booming now, captivating the hall, "is a commoner who, by all accounts, should have been torn to shreds by Shadowfang. Instead, she soothes it. She calms its ferocity. She has, dare I say, tamed it." He spat the word as if it were venom. "This is not empathy, Lyra. This is manipulation. This is witchcraft." The accusation hung in the air, a bell tolling for Alara. Lyra's heart hammered against his ribs. Panic, so cold and sharp, pierced through him. Kael wasn't just questioning his judgment, he was dismantling his reign, brick by painful brick. Shadowfang's distant shudder was now a full-blown retreat, a frantic urge to hide, leaving Lyra alone, exposed. "I demand a public test, Lyra," Kael announced, his gaze sweeping over the silent, captivated court. "Let us see if this girl's calm is truly a natural gift, or if it is born of dark magic. Let her face the accusations in the open court. Let her prove she is not a sorceress, a witch who has turned your own beast against you and fractured the very foundation of your power." He smiled then, a triumphant, chilling flash of teeth. "Unless, of course, you fear what the truth might reveal." The hall erupted in a murmur of whispers, fear and suspicion intertwining. Lyra stared at Kael, the weight of the challenge crushing him. He could feel Shadowfang's deep unease, its retreat from the raw, exposed wound that Kael had just ripped open. The beast, his beast, was no longer a mirror of his rage, but a reflection of his deepest vulnerability, now laid bare for all to see. And Alara, the silent, empathetic girl, held the key to both his beast's peace and his own unravelling. The trial by beast, the great hall, hummed with a tension so thick it seemed to press down on all assembled, torches guttered, their wavering light painting long, dancing shadows that mirrored the court's unease. Lord Kael, a predator's grin stretching his hawkish features, stood at the beast's pit, his gaze impaling Lyra. "Let the witch prove her innocence," he snarled, his voice a triumphant boom echoing through the stone chamber, or laced with chilling malice. From her shadowed confinement, Ilara was roughly propelled forward. God's hands shoved her toward the pit's gaping maw, a chasm promising oblivion, her heart hammered, a frantic drum against her ribs, yet her steps remained steady, her chin held high. A low growl vibrated from the depths, a sound that resonated deep in the bones of everyone present, a primal warning of immense power, untamed fury. Shadowfang emerged, not with its usual bounding ferocity, but dragging itself into the light, movement sluggish, almost unwilling. Its obsidian fur bristled, a guttural snarl escaping its throat, a sound of profound confusion and agitation. The beast's eyes, typically molten gold, were clouded, mirroring the fear radiating from the packed gallery. Kyle's smirk widened, his eyes glinting with satisfaction. He saw the creature's distress as irrefutable proof of Ilara's dark influence, a vivid demonstration of the chaos she sowed. Lyra felt the agitation of his bond beast as a dull ache in his own chest, a phantom limb throbbing with discomfort. The connection, once a vibrant river of shared instinct, had dwindled to a sluggish, polluted trickle. Shadowfang's muddled state only deepened Lyra's dread, reflecting his own confusion. An icy tendril of panic coiled in his gut, a stark realization that his dominion, his very essence, was eroding. "Speak to it, witch," Kale commanded, his voice dripping with condescension. "If your magic is pure, let it be seen." Ilara stood at the pit's precipice, a stark contrast to the snarling beast before her. The flickering light caught the pale line of her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands, yet her eyes, infixed on Shadowfang, held an unwavering calm. The beast paced, its massive head swinging from side to side, its growl escalating. A collective gasp rippled through the court. Dame Isolde, perched in the gallery, felt a shiver of primal fear crawl up her spine, mingled with a strange, undeniable awe. Then Ilara spoke. Her voice, though soft, carried an unexpected resonance, cutting through the beast's snarls and the murmur of the crowd like a silver thread. "Shadowfang," she murmured, her tone a gentle caress, devoid of fear or command. "It's all right. You're safe." The words were simple, yet they held immense power. Shadowfang paused, its head tilting slightly as if attempting to decipher a forgotten melody. The agitation in its eyes slowly began to recede, replaced by a flicker of recognition, a hesitant curiosity. Its bristling fur softened, and the deep growl in its throat subsided to an almost imperceptible, low purr. A profound silence descended upon the hall, broken only by the soft thud of Shadowfang's paw on the stone. The beast, which moments before had been a tempest of fury, now lay down, its immense body settling with a sigh. Its eyes, clear once more, found Ilara's, holding a gaze of quiet understanding. Lyra watched, transfixed. The dull ache in his chest vanished, replaced by a sensation he couldn't name, a strange lightness, a fragile hope. He felt the beast's calm as a balm to his own ravaged spirit, a foreign peace washing over him. The fractured bond with Shadowfang, though not healed, felt less agonizing, less distant. A chasm had opened in his understanding, and through it he saw not a witch, but a conduit. A whisper of something impossibly ancient and profoundly true. The court gasped again, this time not in fear, but in astonishment. Carl's triumphant smirk had dissolved, replaced by a look of bewildered fury. The game had shifted. A king's declaration. A hush, thick as winter fog, descended upon the beast pit. The smell of fear and damp earth hung heavy. Lyra, his face a mask of bewildered authority, stared at Ilara. Her gentle hands stroked Shadowfang's scarred muzzle, a sight that should have been impossible, a betrayal to every instinct he possessed. The beast, his beast, rumbled a soft purr. its golden eyes fixed on her with an adoration that twisted a knife in Lyra's gut. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his control. This wasn't just a servant taming an animal. This was a fracture in his very being. This sorcery! Kyle's voice, hoarse with fury, shattered the silence. He lunged forward, pointing a trembling finger at Alara. She has bewitched the beast, Alpha, a dark spirit, surely. Lyra's gaze snapped to Kyle. The raw fear he felt, the dread that churned in his own chest as his beast's dominion was challenged, transmuted into a searing anger. Not at Alara, but at the man who dared to question his judgment, his kingdom's stability. "Silence, Lord Kale." His voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the arena, silencing even the rustling banners. "Your accusations are baseless. What you witness is not witchcraft, but a profound connection, a rare gift bestowed upon our kingdom." He strode to the edge of the pit, his eyes sweeping over the bewildered faces of the assembled court. "Alara," he declared, his voice ringing with a conviction he was only just beginning to grasp, "is not a threat. She is a beacon of hope." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Dame Isolde clutched her silken shawl, a primal awe warring with the lingering fear in her wide eyes. Never in generations had a human, let alone a mere servant, commanded such power over the Alpha's beast. Lyra, however, felt a strange, unsettling pull, a new kind of awareness blooming in the hollow space where his beast's usual dominance had resided. He looked at Alara, truly looked at her, and saw not a witch, but a quiet strength, an unyielding calm that resonated deeply with the agitated tremor in his own spirit. "Alpha, with all due respect," Kale persisted, his face a mottled red. "This defies all natural order. Such power, it cannot be trusted." Lyra turned, his eyes like chips of granite. "My judgment is final, Lord Kale. Are you questioning my authority as Alpha King?" The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. Kyle, sputtering, retreated, his fury now tempered with a healthy dose of fear. Later, in the shadowed quiet of the castle's hidden gardens, Lyra found himself seeking Alara's company. The air, usually thick with the scent of his own restless power, felt lighter, less oppressive. He watched her as she tended to a patch of wilting moon petals, her touch as gentle with the fragile blooms as it had been with Shadowfang. "Alara," he began, his voice surprisingly subdued. "What you did with Shadowfang?" He struggled for words. "I don't understand it." She straightened, her gaze steady, devoid of either fear or subservience. "He was afraid, Your Majesty, confused. He felt your own anxieties, your anger." Lyra stared, a cold knot tightening in his chest. "My anxieties?" The idea that his beast, an extension of his own formidable will, could be so vulnerable, so transparent, was a jarring revelation. He gestured towards a stone bench, inviting her to sit. "My beast, he carries a great weight. Burdens from my lineage, from the throne. A constant roar in my mind, a demand for dominance, for control." His voice was low, almost a confession. Lately it has become unbearable, a silent scream that no one else hears. He looked away, embarrassed by the raw honesty. "Before you, it was a part of me I believed I understood. Now, it feels broken." Alara listened, her silence a comforting balm. "Perhaps," she said softly, "he is not broken, Your Majesty. And perhaps he is simply aching for a different kind of understanding. A different kind of connection." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated deep within him, stirring a fragile hope he hadn't known he possessed. He found himself wanting to understand, truly understand, for the first time in his life, the unspoken language of his own beast, and the woman who seemed to speak it so effortlessly. Shared shadows. Shared light. The hearth's erratic light painted the king's chambers with dancing shadows, a stark contrast to Ilara's newfound serenity. At her feet, Shadowfang, a colossal silhouette, occasionally rumbled a deep, contented purr that resonated through the very stones. Lyra, across from her, wrestled with a complex blend of apprehension and eager anticipation. He'd witnessed her tenacity, her defiant spirit, but the full scope of her arduous journey remained untold. "My village," Ilara began, her voice a soft, unwavering current, "was tucked away in the whispering woods. We lived in harmony, with the earth, with its creatures. My mother taught me to perceive, not merely with my ears, but with my very soul." Her gaze drifted, lost in a distant memory. Then came the blight. It withered the trees, tainted the streams. The animals became frantic, their terror a tangible wave that engulfed us. I tried to help, to calm them, but the panic was too vast. I lost everything. My family, my home. A tear traced a path down her cheek, yet her eyes remained remarkably clear, unyielding. I was discovered, barely clinging to life, cradling a half-starved fawn. They condemned my gift, my ability to connect, to feel their suffering. They branded it witchcraft. Lyra listened, a tightening knot in his gut. Her narrative was a stark mirror, reflecting his own buried grief, the crushing weight of his inherited burdens. He recognized the profound solitude in her eyes, a loneliness he knew intimately. "And yet," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you endured. You found solace." Ilara nodded, her gaze interlocking with his, a deep well of understanding blossoming between them. "I learned that the deepest pain, the fiercest anger, can also be a wellspring of strength. But only if you confront it, Lyra. Only if you allow yourself to experience it fully, and then let it flow through you." She gestured vaguely towards Shadowfang, whose ears twitched perceptibly. "Your beast. He shoulders your weight, your anxieties, your unvoiced furies. They have become his burdens, de-splintering the very core of your bond." A cold dread seeped into Lyra's bones. He'd always regarded Shadowfang as an extension of his own might, a loyal implement of power, never as a reflection of his own fragmented spirit. The familiar surge of panic rose, the urge to retreat, to fortify his inner walls. But Ilara's gaze held him fast, calm and resolute. "Close your eyes, Lyra," she instructed, her voice a gentle coax. "Think of that unbearable roar you described. Don't push it away. Invite it in. What does it feel like? What does it yearn for?" Hesitantly, Lyra complied. The roar was there, a distant thunder in his mind, gradually intensifying. It wasn't solely anger, he now realized, but a piercing sorrow, a dread of failure, an overwhelming sense of isolation. He envisioned his father's stern visage, and heard the whispers of his ancestors, felt the crushing weight of the crown. He sensed Shadowfang's agitation, a low growl rumbling in the beast's chest, echoing his internal maelstrom. "It's all right," Ilara whispered, her hand resting lightly on Shadowfang's massive head. "Let it wash over you. Don't resist." Lyra felt a strange, unburdening release. The roar intensified, threatening to engulf him, but then a peculiar light began to pierce the darkness, a nascent spark of understanding. This wasn't weakness, this was profound truth. He felt the raw, unadulterated pain, and for the first time he didn't flinch. He simply felt it. As the emotional torrent began its slow retreat, a profound calm settled over him. He opened his eyes. Ilara remained, her hand now stroking Shadowfang's fur in slow, rhythmic motions. The beast's growl had softened to a gentle thrum. Its eyes, usually fierce, now held a deep, trusting glow. "He feels it too," Ilara said, her voice barely audible. Your acceptance of your own shadows lightens his burden. He responds to your truth. She gently cupped Shadowfang's muzzle, looking into its golden eyes. You are a magnificent creature, Shadowfang. You carry the king's heart, his burdens, his strength, but you needn't carry his sorrow alone. Lyra watched, mesmerized, as a visible ripple seemed to pass through Shadowfang. The tension in its powerful frame eased, its breathing deepened. It leaned into Alara's touch, a silent testament of trust and devotion. And through their shared bond, Lyra felt it too, a subtle recalibration, a mending within his own spirit. The fractured connection with his beast began to knit itself back together, not as master and weapon, but as two halves of a complete whole, finally aligned, finally at peace. The unbearable roar had subsided, replaced by a gentle hum, a promise of shared light, shared solace. The renewed kingdom, the collective gasp that rippled through the great hall, was audible, a sharp intake of breath, as Lord Kael's face crumpled. His sneering triumph, so recently painted across his features, dissolved into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Shadowfang, now radiating a serene power, stood beside Lyra, its massive head resting near Ilara's hand. The beast's earlier agitation had vanished, replaced by a deep, resonant calm that vibrated through the very stones of the castle. It was a calm that mirrored Lyra's own, as a quiet strength that had settled deep within him. Kyle, stripped of his perceived victory, found his voice caught in his throat, a pathetic croak of disbelief. This is sorcery, Kyle finally managed, his words a desperate, flailing accusation. He pointed a trembling finger at Ilara, his eyes wild with venom. She has bewitched the king, the beast. This cannot stand. Lyra, his gaze unwavering, met Kyle's frantic stare. There was no aggression in his eyes, only a profound, almost sorrowful understanding. Enough, Kael, he said, his voice level, carrying an authority Kael had never before heard. It wasn't a roar of dominance, but a steady current of unshakable power. Your machinations have failed. The beast is whole, and so am I. The weight of Lyra's words, devoid of bluster yet brimming with absolute certainty, so crushed Coil's remaining defiance. He looked around the hall, desperate for an ally, but found only averted gazes and the stunned silence of the court. Dame Isolde, her initial bewilderment now softened into awestruck reverence, watched Ilara with an intensity that spoke volumes. The fear that had gripped the court had dissipated, replaced by a dawning comprehension of the extraordinary connection unfolding before them. Defeated, Kael turned on his heel, his once proud stride now a hurried, shuffling retreat. The clatter of his heavy boots on the polished floor echoed through the hushed hall, each step a testament to his humiliation. He offered no parting shot, no final desperate plea. His power, so intricately woven into the court's fear and Lyra's instability, had utterly unravelled. With a final, furious glance over his shoulder at Ilara, his face contorted in a silent promise of revenge, he vanished through the great doors. As the echoes of Kael's retreat faded, a new stillness descended upon the hall. It was a stillness not of tension, but of peace. Lyra turned to Ilara, his hand reaching out, not to command, but to connect. Their fingers met, a silent acknowledgement of the new world they had forged. The distance between king and servant had evaporated, replaced by the profound understanding shared between two beings who had faced the depths of despair and emerged together into the light. Ilara stood beside him, no longer in the shadows, but in the full glow of the morning sun streaming through the arched windows. Her simple gown seemed to shimmer, reflecting a quiet strength that emanated from her very core. She was not a queen, nor a consort in the traditional sense, but something far more vital: a companion, a conduit, a healer. Her presence beside Lyra symbolized not just a shift in the kingdom's power dynamics, but a deeper, more elemental healing. In the months that followed, the kingdom began to breathe again. Lyra, unburdened by the constant internal struggle, found a clarity of purpose that had always eluded him. His decisions were no longer fueled by instinctual rage or inherited duty, but by a thoughtful wisdom honed by his recent trials. Shadowfang, a visible manifestation of Lyra's renewed spirit, moved with a quiet dignity, its presence a comforting assurance rather than a terrifying threat. The beast frequently sought Alara's touch. A gentle nuzzle of its massive head into her palm is a testament to the profound bond she had forged. Alara, now an integral part of Lyra's daily life, moved through the castle with an innate grace. She offered counsel, not through pronouncements, but through gentle observations, her quiet wisdom often guiding Lyra towards solutions he hadn't considered. The villagers, initially wary of the witch who had tamed the king's beast, soon witnessed the tangible benefits of her influence. The crops flourished under careful management, disputes were resolved with a newfound fairness, and a sense of communal harmony began to settle over the lands. The kingdom thrived, not through displays of brute force or grand pronouncements, but through a quiet, steady power born of healing and understanding. Lyra and Alara, standing side by side, were a living testament to the possibility of renewal, a beacon of hope in a world once shrouded in fear. Theirs was a leadership built on empathy, a kingdom where the roar of the beast had given way to the gentle hum of a world made whole.